Alright, hello everyone, my name is Jayhawker, and this is Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland for the Game Boy Advance. This is a remake of Kirby's Adventure, released in 2002. It's mostly the same game, just with updated graphics, music, and most importantly physics that make it quite a bit different of a speedrun. Alright, let's go ahead and get right into it. So, the very first thing that we do in this run is entering the first stage. We do the same movement every time in order to get these two Waddle-Doos to do what we want them to, and we suck them up both at the same time and then mix them for wheel. Contrary to what some people think, mix wheels are not actually random, they're all just timing based. So we can get, theoretically, whatever ability we want as long as we inhale two enemies that are the same every time. Each mix, though, is pretty difficult timing. It's a 4-frame window in a 60 FPS game, which means we have 1/15 of a second to hit the mix that we want to. Fortunately, though, if you miss the very first mix in this game during PB attempts, you can always just reset the game and try it again. And even in a marathon setting, it's not that big of a risk, because if you miss the mix, it only loses about 8 seconds to go powerless. So really, it's a pretty low-risk, medium-reward strategy. This whole first world is a mixture of wheel movement and then later burning, but right here we drop wheel so that we can get a double star that one-shots this mini-boss. And we time it so that wheel bounces right back to us and we can suck it up and continue. This room in particular is one that's very annoying to do without wheel and is really fun to do with wheel. And we're already just about through the first 2 stages of the game. This is a very fast-paced game with a lot of really tight movement. And no real glitches or anything to speak of. So we do everything pretty much as developer intended, and there's a lot of ability variety, which is kind of unique for a Kirby game. A lot of them just have one ability that's really overpowered and takes up most of the run, but this game in particular is really diverse with abilities. I believe there's about 10 or 11 different abilities that get a decent amount of showing throughout the course of this run. Which, well, that depends a little bit on what route you use, but that's in general. And right here we see our first ability change from wheel into burning. Burning is a little bit slower than wheel as far as horizontal movement goes, but it's definitely worth it because fighting bosses with wheel is a whole lot harder than fighting it with burning. And we've got a mini-boss coming up right at the beginning of this next stage, Mr. Frosty. He's got 2 patterns that he can do. He gave me the slightly worse one right here, where he charges up against the wall. What we want him to do, actually, is grab an ice block, and that makes it a little bit easier to fight him, but that didn't quite happen. So we go through the rest of the stage with burning. We'll go grab an invincibility candy in this next room and make it through the rest of it, and then we'll be on to the boss of this world. There are 7 different worlds in this game, and then the final boss fight against the Nightmare Orb, followed by Nightmare himself. And most of them have 6 stages, but the first 2 worlds only have 4 and 5, respectively. Now this first boss fight actually is not fastest to do with burning. It'd be faster to do it with an ability like KNiDL. However, burning is a lot faster for movement in the stages surrounding it, mostly 1-4 and 2-1. So the stages right before and right after Wispy, so it makes it worth it. But really we just bang our heads against Wispy a bunch of times, grab the Star Rod, and finish the stage. One interesting thing to note, though, is that when we grab the Star Rod at the end of Wispy, we want to try to do it as close to the center of the stage as possible, so that Kirby doesn't have to walk to the middle of the stage before starting his dance animation. All these burning routes are pretty precise. They're exactly where we want them to end up, for the most part at least. And they're not quite just mashing through the room as they might appear to be. We haven't seen a ton of it yet, but the powerless movement in this game is also really good. It's my personal favorite in the entire Kirby series, because jumping is really versatile. You can jump at basically any height you want to, so most jumps that you see in this run are pretty precise. They're exactly the height that we want them. Like that jump right there, for example, was a pretty short one, and that jump right there was a little bit higher, jumping to the Warp Star. And the next thing that we're going to be doing right here is there's another mini-boss coming up, so what we're going to do is turn around, drop our ability, and combine it with one of these enemies stuck in the blocks here to once again one-shot this. This trick doesn't work for the entire run, but there's at least one more place where we use it before the end of it. But by the end of the game, the mini-bosses end up with more health, so doing a double star like that does not kill them, so we gotta get creative in different ways. And we also went back to wheel for this part, because wheel is the fastest horizontal movement ability in the game, across the ground, that is. It's another one of the reasons why we switched to burning in World 1, because burning has better movement in the air. This fish room is pretty difficult. It's got some really tight timings to it. And if you mess up slightly, it's really easy to get hit by one of those fish, but it's not a big deal because we intentionally take damage right here, actually, so that we can go up and into our first Meta Knights arena. They're not actually called arenas officially, but most runners refer to them as arenas to not get them confused with the actual Meta Knight boss fight later in the game, and also just because it's easier to say than Meta Knight's fight. And the general strategy for most of these arenas, which there are 5 of in the game, I believe, is to just go in without an ability and suck up each enemy and spit it into another one, because that kills them faster than doing it with an ability will. So we're going to float on up into the next stage, and because we don't have an ability from the last one, we're going to grab one in this room. It's going to be Spark right here. The reason we grab Spark is because it has a really high damage output, and we've got another mini-boss to fight right here. And it is faster to kill it with Spark than to do another double star strategy. We're also going to be dropping Spark in a pretty interesting way at the beginning of the next stage to give us a little bit of a boost. I like to do little hops through this room to get through it very slightly faster, something that only saves frames, but, you know, every time save is something that we take. Now, one thing you'll notice is that there are a lot of enemies on screen at any given time in this game. And what they do, for the most part, is actually random, but it's also not very costly if they do something that's not what we want to. Generally, we're just going to be reacting to what they do. And right there, actually messed it up a tiny bit, but we're supposed to drop the ability so that we can bounce up a little bit higher than we normally would and land on that top platform so that we could just keep running. And now we switch back to wheel. There is a lot of wheel towards the beginning of the game. One thing you'll notice me doing is turning around right before I bonk into a wall if I'm going over a gap. As that, we call those bonk wheels. And that sends Kirby forward a little bit and actually saves a little bit of time over unwheeling. I accidentally took a hit there, so I'm just going to go on without it and switch to high jump. High jump is my personal favorite ability in this game. It's really fast. It is the fastest vertical movement in the game, as opposed to wheel being the fastest horizontal movement. And it also has a really high damage output, so we're going to be using it to fight quite a few bosses in this game, actually. It's also super easy to control where it goes, especially because you can cancel it at any point and send yourself shooting back down. And the cancel also has a small hitbox. So this is Paint Roller. He's our second boss. He's very straightforward. He'll go to one of the other 3 corners from the top left. Going to the top right is the fastest, but no pattern is really that much faster or slower, only a second or 2. And so then we move on to our third world, Butter Building. Butter Building is the first world that there is some randomness in. Well, I mean, big randomness that most players complain about. So we got another TikTok boss fight, which we do with high jump. He normally takes 1 less hit than that. I had to do an extra high jump there to kill him, because I didn't space myself quite properly, but that's doesn't lose very much time at all. This stage is pretty simple other than that TikTok fight, just run through the rest of it, and we're already done with it. The next stage, 3-2, is the first stage that runners generally really complain about. Right at the beginning, there's this ladder that's pretty difficult to get through. Some people try to make it through that 1 tile gap, but I didn't. I just went past it, because the penalty for missing it is usually getting burned, which is a pretty long animation, and you risk losing high jump completely. It loses quite a bit of time, so it's risky, it looks cool, saves probably about a second though, if you do get it. But we drop high jump fairly quickly here actually and grab sword, partly because It's a little bit tricky to do high jump movement in this room, but mostly because room after this we're going to be running into another mini-boss fight. I actually got my jump input eaten right there, so I accidentally got frozen by the pink ones, but I was able to get sword back for this fight. Now, Bugsy, this is the the bane of a lot of Nightmare and Dreamland runners. And this is a little bit foreshadowing for the worst stage in the game, which is 7-2. There's a boss rush of 4 mini-bosses. Bugsy's one of them. And if he hits you in a certain way, he'll grab you, and he'll do one of 4 different throw animations, and they all have varying lengths, but they all feel like they take a very long time, and it's very frustrating to get hit by him, so that's definitely an annoying point. But we switch back to high jump because high jump is the main ability in this world, right? This room, unfortunately, is pretty boring. Just a fog room where we wait for the door to open. In the original Kirby's Adventure, they were a lot more entertaining. You actually ran in a circle around a rotating building. But for some reason, they took that out in this game. Not really sure why. Next, we go into 3-4, which only has a couple of rooms, and the main one is the second Meta Knight's arena. Now, there's a couple of different strategies that runners do for this one. Some like to drop high jump and try to pick it up again before the end of the fight, and some runners just keep high jump all the way through and use it to kill the enemies. And I am one of the runners that likes to keep high jump, so that's what I'm going to be doing for this arena. There's a little bit of randomness as to where the enemies are placed, especially this one right here in the top left that gave me some difficulty this time around. But fortunately I was able to get high jump back. Make it through. Next up you just make it to the door, and then go grab this Maxim Tomato. Fortunately the game heals you. It knows that it threw kind of a difficult level at you, and just goes ahead and lets you heal. One thing that I should mention about this game is that when you are at risk of dying, right after you finish a stage, you can actually soft reset the game to get your health back and get back to 2 lives. It only loses about 2 seconds, so it is a lot better than dying in most cases, especially if you're about to game over. And the only downside, though, is that you can't keep your ability to the next stage. It brings you back into the game with no ability, so it's really only viable to do in places where the ability, either you don't need an ability going into the next stage, or the ability will only save a small amount of time. So I skipped over 3-5. That was a pretty simple stage because you're invincible the whole time while you do it. This stage is a little more tricky. That first Crash Bomber at the beginning of this room is actually a very, very small window to be able to hit it on time. A lot of newer runners will just go ahead and wait. This room is another fog room where you wait, but at the beginning you do have to act pretty quickly to get in front of this cannon. And we're going to be going into our first dark room of the game. The game is supposed to give you light ability here, so that you can see where everything is. That's what that little ghost guy with sunglasses that we kill is. But we don't need it. We know where all the blocks are, and we know how to get through it with high jump, which is much faster than switching to light. Some pretty precise high jumps through there to land right on those platforms so that we can get through this stage as fast as possible. And we go to our third boss of the game, which is Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, aka the Sun and the Moon. And it's random which one of them goes up first. I like to guess Moon. Shout out to the Moon crew. In general, these guys will take 3 high jump hits to kill, but I spaced mine slightly wrong, so I had to go for an extra hit on each of them. I also guessed wrong, which lost 2 seconds. So that's not a very big deal. Some runners prefer to take 1 second of time loss by not guessing at all, but we get that 1 second of time save every time we guess right, so definitely more fun to go for that. This stage has some pretty fun high jump movement as well. A little bit dangerous in a couple of spots, and some runners like to grab UFO right here because it makes the next room a little bit easier, but I like to keep high jump. It's also a little bit faster too. I jump through this Gordo, and then we slide 3 times, and then high jump out through these blocks. But then we switch off to Tornado here, which is our next ability that we're going to be using. Unfortunately, not going to see very much use of it, only actually for 1 room in the next stage. However, we're going to see a lot more of it come World 6. World 6 is Orange Ocean, and that is a very, very tornado-heavy world. Also, if you like the Tornado ability, I'd recommend checking out Kirby's Adventure speedrun, because in that game, this ability was very, very overpowered, and it is used for most of the any % run, and I believe also a lot of the 100% run. So this room, there's a little bit of powerless movement. One thing you'll notice me doing a lot is sliding. And sliding in some Kirby games is actually faster than running. In this Kirby game, sliding is just a tiny bit faster than running. However, if you don't cancel it in any way, it becomes a lot slower because it has a lot of end lag. So whenever you see runners sliding, they're usually sliding across one-tile gaps, or they're sliding off of ledges, because that cancels the end lag animation and is faster than just running off of the side. Had another fight that we use Spark for here. Once again, Spark is a pretty quick ability for killing mini-bosses, especially when it's hard to double-star them, or impossible to in certain cases. That one is one that's just very, very hard to do a double-star on, and it's way more consistent to use Spark. So, for this stage, some runners just like to keep Spark all the way through, but found recently that grabbing High Jump in the room after this is more optimal. This is also, interestingly, a lot of runners' favorite stages. I'm not really sure why. Must be a fairly easy one. People like these propeller effects. Little wind stuff that only appear in this stage. That one high jump to hit the Crash Bomber there is not very precise, but it definitely trips some runners up. So that's a deterrent for using it. Now, the following stage, 4-4, is another spot where some people like to mix for wheel in the very first room, but it is a pretty difficult mix, and it only saves a few seconds, and I personally like to move around with high jump a lot more, so I go ahead and do that through this stage. Another thing I should mention is that the wheel mix here is just for getting wheel early, because we actually do grab wheel regardless in the following room. Room's got a lot of birds in it, and sometimes it's kind of impressive watching runners get through this one without getting hit. But it's actually a lot easier than it looks like. Now here, we're going to be unwheeling and re-wheeling every time, because it's actually faster than just turning around with wheel. Messed it up a little bit at the end there. You get the idea. So, we're going to drop wheel, though, and grab Spark one more time for yet another mini-boss fight, Fan Fan. Fan Fan is notoriously the most annoying boss in 7-2, which is that's a stage that I'm going to be referring to a lot throughout this run. Is also quite useful because grabbing his ability Throw gets us through this next room full of blocks a lot faster than it would. We would have to either slide or puff through those otherwise, and that would take quite a bit of time. It's also really useful in this next stage because we have our third Meta Knights arena coming up. And what Throw does, basically, is instead of just inhaling an enemy like normal, every enemy that you inhale becomes a double star. It's extra useful, because double stars can go through enemies and can actually kill multiple with just one double star. So that is where we're going to save a lot of time from doing powerless in this arena. Here's the biggest example right there is normally killing all three in one hit right there. But I was a little bit too slow and I only got 2, so I had to back that up a little bit. But grab Burning in the next room to continue on World 4. This last room here is kind of a tricky one. You can actually go through the Gordos, and the spike hitboxes, it kind of looks like we're going through them, but we're actually not. We're actually barely avoiding those spikes, because if you do hit the spikes, even if you're inside Burning, you're not invincible and you can get hit by them. The normal route for that is to go up and around, but we like to do things fast here. So here we drop Burning and get past these frogs. It's fastest to not hit any of them, and just to swim past them, but they are random and they do often run into you, which loses time, so sometimes it's safer to just go ahead and kill some of them. We grab Sword for this next TikTok fight, and we make it our way through the second and I believe final dark room of the game. This room, actually grabbing Light might be useful for newer runners because there is, or well, not newer runners, but casual players, because there actually is a switch in there that will fill your health completely. And those switches are required for 100%ing the game. However, you can just enter the switch room in the dark if you know where it is, so unfortunately Light remains a useless ability. We drop Sword at the end of that stage so that we can grab High Jump at the beginning of our next boss fight, Krakow. And High Jump is far and away the fastest ability to use here. because, like I said before, it's the fastest vertical movement in the game. And as you can see, there is a lot of vertical movement to be done in this area leading up to the Krako fight. Next, we're gonna time these so that our cancels don't actually hit Krako, land inside of him, or if I mess it up like that, then you actually do get hit by him. So you gotta make sure to stay around his edges when you do those high jump cancels, or else you'll get hit by him. Next, we're moving into World 5, Yogurt Yard, which is my personal favorite world. Very first stage here, pretty simple. Use high jump at the beginning, but drop it and go through powerless. And then go in the secret door right there, actually, to grab stone. It's one of, I think, 2 places where the secret door is faster than the door. So, going through there, it's a little bit faster just because you use stone to fall. And that's the only time that we're going to be using stone in this entire run. So, if that's your favorite ability, then sorry about that, but at least you got to see it. So next up is 5-2, where we're going to see the debut of one of the most interesting abilities in this game that's only in Kirby's Adventure and Nightmare in Dreamland. It's actually the strongest ability in this game, but it's super weird to use, and most casual players didn't touch it at all. See if you can guess what it is before I grab it. Just think through your repertoire of Kirby abilities. Here it comes now. It's Ball. Ball is a very, very strange ability, but it is really fun to use. Going into Ball is pretty simple, but controlling it afterwards is really difficult. We do use it to fall pretty quickly, similar to Stone though, and if we do things right, we can actually kill mini-bosses in only 2 hits, just like that. So that is our ability of choice for damage output, and it's what we're going to be using in the aforementioned dreaded 7-2 stage, where in that stage actually mini-bosses have a bit more health, so it'll take 3 ball hits per enemy, but it's still going to be really fun to watch. That's definitely a random point when it comes to races also though, and having a good 7-2 can make the difference in a race. This is, also I forgot to mention, but this is an amazing game to watch races of. Because there are a lot of tiny different strategies that runners use, and it's really fun to see how they play out, and the random points in the game don't usually kill runs, like 7-2. Top runners will only lose a few seconds there, but that can definitely make the difference in tight races. So stuff like that is really fun. I'm going to do some wheel jumps, because actually if you wheel through these blocks, you will fall down and get stuck, and that's not good, so I need to do some precise turns in this stage as well. And there we go. That's some really fun movement right there. Very tight getting through that spike shaft. You're supposed to use Parasol and float very slowly through it, but I actually think that's harder to do than with wheel even. So for this stage we're going to grab Burning and get through this one very long room full of spikes. It's kind of easy to mess up and get hit by the spikes here, so just gotta play it a little bit careful. And then we're going to be killing a Spark enemy, not actually taking it, because this next room is another Meta Knight's Arena, where we have to suck and spit these guys. This is one of my favorite ones, though, because of that double star strategy in the middle. It actually kills 2 enemies, one of them pretty much before he even comes on screen, so he doesn't even get a chance to fight us. But we switch back to Ball pretty quickly right after this, and this strat is called Ball Swag. Shoutouts to everybody who uses Ball Swag, and anti-shoutouts to everybody who is too scared to go for it. Then we use another ball strategy right here, just to get up to this max in Tomato, and we fall with Ball past 5 pigs, that's the queue. Once we pass the 5th pig, we unball and go through the exit door. We're going to need to keep Ball through this entire next stage, though, until we get to the mini-boss fight towards the end of it. And then we're going to be using his ability to get through the rest of the stage. So this beginning cannon, we got to go pretty quickly so that we can time ourselves to jump in between those cannon shots. Some newer runners just like to wait for them, and some runners have a strategy where you actually use Ball to get through them. And it's safe because if you mess up the timing slightly, you will not get hit by the cannonballs because you're still in Ball, which is invincible. Ball is invincible everywhere except for when it's bouncing and when it's at the top of its arc. So those are the 2 points where you can get hit while using it. And understanding that makes ball a heck of a lot easier to use. Here in this last room, these pigs are random, and some of them can fall on you and make you lose burning. I messed up and lost a little bit early anyway, but that room is a little bit annoying because of those pigs in particular. There's a lot of enemies in this game that are notorious for being bad. Kabus are one of them, those pigs. Hotheads can shoot fireballs at you, snipe you out of some stuff. And this stage in the game, I'm not sure which ability the developers wanted us to get. It's really tough to tell. That's something that you probably noticed throughout most of the game, though, is that the developers are pretty insistent on which abilities that you should have going into each room of the game, even. Because they've got things pretty well designed specifically for each ability, so it's actually kind of rare that we bring in an ability that's different from what the developers intended. However, after this, we're going to go right back in here and quickly get 2 of these wheels at the same time. Hold down and hold A, and we get the first ability in that mix wheel, which is Hammer. And Hammer has a pretty high damage output, and is really good for fighting this boss, Heavy Mole. You gotta space out your Hammer spins just a little bit, though, because he does get invincibility frames in between those hits, so those are timing based. Now we move on to Orange Ocean, which is the 6th world. And as I mentioned before, this is categorized by the Tornado ability. However, there is a slightly more recently found strat where runners will switch, instead of switching to Tornado in 6-2, they will keep burning through 6-2, and mix 2 of these flamers together, and actually get Wheel, and go through the rest of it with Wheel. It's a little bit slower in 6-3 where you do the mix, but it saves a lot of time over to Tornado in the next 2 stages. It's definitely a lot harder and a lot more precise to use, and it's a little bit of a risk going for a mix like that this late in a run, so there are very few runners that actually go for that, but it's really exciting to see, especially in a race setting. So in this run, I'm just going to be doing Tornado, but in the future I am planning on picking up that particular strat. Here, fortunately, the game decides to heal us a little bit. Another very well-placed health item. And in this room, it's a little bit tricky to get through. There's a lot of really precise movement to do to not get hit by enemies. We need to hug the right side of the pillar to not respawn the Crash Bomber, which, if he explodes, the game freezes for a few frames. Gotta save all that time that we can. And right here is where we switch to Tornado for using it. Those runners that are using Wheel will just skip that and continue on with burning through here, though. So this is one area where in a race you might see a slightly different strategy come through. But they do converge at the end of World 6, and so you can see just how much time save one of them would get over the other. In general, Wheel is a little bit faster, but it's also a lot more risky, so sometimes the safe strats are actually do end up being faster, depending on how lucky the Wheel Runner gets and how good the Wheel Runner's execution is. Here I go through a little bit slow to get into the next fight. Now, this fight right here, with Tornado, is pretty simple. He takes 8 Tornado hits, so ideally you want to kill him in 2 cycles, with either 5 Tornado hits and then 3, or 4 and then 4, like I got there. Then jump off this box and Tornado up here. Another room, mostly just float, but we stop and land on the left side, or as close to the left side as possible of that box as we can, so that I can Tornado right up into the Warp Star. Now all of that stuff is actually faster with Tornado than it is with Wheel, but if runners are using Wheel, then right here in this room is where it starts to save time. Oh, moving on to 6-4. 6-4 is one of the harder stages in the game. It's also got a couple of fun things about it, so we'll get to those soon. This cave room is pretty notorious. These first 2 enemies are pretty difficult. It's actually faster to jump over the first one and slide the second one, but I took it a little bit safe there. Getting past this Gordo and spikes right here is also very difficult, because it's really important to keep your ability through this room, and if you get hit in the water, you cannot recover your ability. So it's a pretty dangerous room. And now we're in the Nut Shack, as some runners like to call it. Shout out to Chooch. And this is the horizontal Nut Shack. In the Nut Shack, it's hard to see where coconuts are going to be, so the general developer intended method is for runners to grab Parasol so that they can float through there safely, but we just memorize where they are so that we can float harmlessly through them. And this room is pretty boring. I like to spice things up a little bit by puffing that Poppy Bros apple and going under it. Probably only saves a few frames, but hey, it looks cool. So we definitely go for those. Then we swim on up into the next room, and this last room right here, this is a very simple room, very straightforward, even more so with Wheel though. Wheel just zips right on through here. Also, one thing I've been forgetting to mention is that these goal games at the end of every stage, in casual play, you want to time them as well as possible to get as high up as you can. Because if you get to 1, you get an extended dance and an extra life. But in speedruns, we want the opposite of that. We want to try to land as low as possible up there. And I believe it's a 3-frame window to land right on the 7th cloud, and that's what we want. However, it's the same timing every single time, so it's really rare to see a high-level runner mess that up. You might see 1 or 2 small mistakes of getting stuck on the edge of a cloud and climbing up to the 6th cloud or climbing up to the 7th cloud. That only loses a couple seconds, but those add up if you're not good at goal games. We've got our final Meta Knights Arena right here. This is definitely the most annoying one because you've got to deal with ice physics while fighting these guys. So this can be a little bit sloppy. See right there, I just slid right past that enemy. But fortunately that's the last thing in the stage. And the next fight is against Meta Knight, who is pretty annoying. So I'm going to soft reset here, as I mentioned before, to get my health back. And I'm going to slide into this sword to grab it. And we're going to see if we can hit him without him blocking and without him hitting us as much times as possible. So see, he's already hit me a couple times and given me a couple of blocks. But overall, that was actually a pretty fast Meta Knight fight. It's pretty rare to get a Meta Knight better than that, so that's pretty strong. After Meta Knight, we managed to get through the world end cutscene, and we move on to the final world in the game, Rainbow Resort. Definitely the hardest and the most intense part of the run. We're gonna get through this part with Sword because we need to keep Sword all the way through this block room. Doing some pretty precise jump spins and slides to get through this block room as quickly as possible. It's also a decent idea to get through with Spark and just let the ice physics carry you around, but it is faster and, in my opinion, more fun to do it. Next, we jump over to the left and mix 2 enemies together to grab Ball, and the stage after this is 7-2. Like I said, the most infamous level in the game, so it'd be great to get Bless RNGs in chat for this one. Of course, though, this is a pre-recorded run, so I already know what happens here. But, like I said, there's 4 mini-bosses, and we actually do go through the secret door here, another spot where we do. Because there's actually more mini-bosses to fight against in their normal door. So, first mini-boss, Bonkers, takes 3 hits. Second one, Fan, we want him to roll, actually. But he jumped towards me, and I got a backup strategy where I hit him without getting grabbed. Next, we want Bugsy to charge at us so that we can do this. Kill him very quickly in 3 hits. And the final one is Fire Lion, which we have to make sure that we don't actually kill Fire Lion corpse once he's dead, because we need to suck it up and get Burning, because Burning saves quite a bit of time in the next 2 stages. So losing it this late in the run can definitely kill a run. So that was an example of a very strong 7-2. But even so, that was a little bit off of my gold. I believe the human best is about 6 seconds faster than that one, maybe even 7 seconds. And it's easy to lose another 7 or 8 seconds on that stage with bad luck. So that is the most random part of the game, and definitely the most interesting part when watching races of this game. So we float up through this room. A lot of runners actually get through this room a little bit differently, which is interesting to see. But in general, you want to do the same thing there every time, so that you can avoid all of the enemy patterns. That's a lot of things in this game, is memorizing the movement patterns that you do through this game, because a lot of them aren't faster or slower than other people's strategies, but as long as you develop a way that is consistent to get through the room without getting hit by enemies, it generally works very well. So, next up we move on to 7-4. 7-4 is another one of those difficult stages that can cause a little bit of trouble. We've got these 4 clock rooms coming up. First one has balls, the second one has pigs, and the balls and the pigs are both pretty random. But the 2 after this have Brontobursts and Flamers, and they are actually set patterns, so they're very nice to us. If you do need to take an intentional death at any point in the run, these clock rooms are what I believe to be the best place. Because if you die, you get reset to the beginning of a room, and those clock rooms are super short, so dying at one of those is perfectly acceptable in most cases. But we go ahead and grab Spark, both to do this final room a bit quicker than without it, and to get through the next stage quite a bit faster. Go ahead and spark that bomb block a little bit early so that we can get up as quickly as possible. And we move on to 7-5. We're almost at the end of the run. 7-5 is the second last stage before the last boss fights. So going in here, the very first room is full of Crash Bombers. So it's pretty crucial to kill these with Spark so that they don't blow up, because they have extremely large hitboxes. So if I seem to be avoiding them by quite a bit, I'm actually still standing barely outside of their range. The old strategy was to take one of the Crash Bombers in here and use it to get the wheelie boss down to 1 health, and then hope that he gives you good RNG, gives you an enemy. But the new strat with Spark is a lot more consistent and a whole lot quicker, removing some of the RNG from the game. That wind tunnel room is also a very clutch execution point. There's definitely risk of falling, dying, and losing wheel, which A, makes the wind tunnel a ton harder to get through, B, loses a lot of time in 7-5, and then you don't have wheel at all for 7-6, and the goal is to keep wheel through the entirety of this stage. This stage is a really fun one, though. It is color-schemed black and white, got a familiar tune. You might recognize this from the very first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land. A little bit of a throwback, miniature version of the whole game, actually. So you might recognize some parts of these rooms from different levels in the very first Kirby game for the Game Boy. But nonetheless, the strategy here is more wheel movement. This cave room is quite a bit annoying. These Kabus are random, and that one right there in particular can often get you hit and sometimes send your ability into the spikes. And if you lose your ability there, that is a problem. Because we want to keep it for as long as we can up until here. Also, breaking these last blocks is quite a bit faster with wheel. And then we're going to mix these two together. It's a second tick mix, so it actually does take a bit of timing, rather than the 7-1 ball mix and the 5-6 hammer mix that we did earlier. But now that we have ball, we're going to move on to KNiDL, is the last world boss. The old strategy here used to be to actually have ball and just hold down A the whole time and hope you get a good pattern from him. But this new strategy, where we kill him really, really quickly, both looks a lot cooler and is a lot more consistent and a little bit faster. Now we move on to the final section of the game, which is the Nightmare Orb, who I believe takes 60 hits to kill. It's quite a long fight, full of a lot of mashing. These star patterns that he does are actually the same every time, so if you memorize what stars he's going to throw when, you can avoid them fairly easily and get a pretty consistent fight. The goal is to get something called the Chargeless Orb, which is basically just to kill the orb before he charges across the screen. He was about to right there. That was barely a Chargeless Orb, but it still was. And now we go through our final cutscene, which is the longest one in the game that we can't skip, unfortunately. But it gives runners a little bit of breathing room. If we're racing on SRL, this is the time that we type .done, because it's got quite a bit of downtime. The final phase, Nightmare, he's actually pretty much a pushover. He's only takes 6 hits, and he actually has the same patterns every time. There's a little bit of randomness in his spawn points, but that's about it. So that first hit, he always does 4 bobs after his health bar is completely full. That's how I time it. Then we get the second hit right there. Third hit, he immediately opens his cape. Fourth hit takes a little bit longer, requires some timing. In general, though, we want to stay mostly on the left side of the screen so that he'll do the same thing every time, and only move over when we need to hit him quickly. So he flies around, and now I puff to the top of the screen because he opens his cape up pretty quickly here, and we go for the final hit here. There's 2 chances to hit him. That was the early one that I missed, and I ended up getting him with that last one. And that is Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, done in 40 minutes and 19 seconds. Thanks for watching, everyone. This is a great game, really fun. It's got a pretty active community, and we're actually going to have an Any% tournament happening in the spring, starting at the end of April. So that's going to be on Speed Gaming, so stay tuned for that. Definitely let people know if you want to join it too, because this is actually a very beginner-friendly run to learn. It's got a great learning curve, super fun, great community. Yeah, thanks for watching.